In 2012, when Disney purchased Star Wars, Bob Iger was personally requested by George Lucas, who he had worked with for decades, to protect and preserve the legacy of Star Wars. Bob Iger had been personally responsible for over $11 billion in box office sales throughout his career, which is like 10% of the global film industry's total value in 2018. And domestically, that number represents about 25% of the film industry. He's received 8 Academy Award nominations for his work in the film industry and received numerous awards, including the prestigious Irving G. Thalberg Award. He was the one who, after a $4 billion acquisition of Lucasfilm by Disney, tried to insulate the directors and talent from overbearing studio heads who wanted corporate Disney to micromanage the direction of the newly acquired Star Wars property, under pressure from shareholders and Disney board of directors to turn a profit on the acquisition by 2020. When Rogue One was being forced by execs to be chopped down and restructured, Bob Iger fought to preserve artistic integrity and save the ending where Darth Vader boards the Rebel cruiser from Alderaan, which for many fans cemented what was already a great story into a Star Wars staple. He brought in Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau to create The Mandalorian and seed the future of the Star Wars connected universe. He pushed to get the final season of Clone Wars made. He personally oversaw the production of Bad Batch, Star Wars Rebels, and even greenlit several original series for Disney+, including Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Rogue Squadron, Cassian Andor, and the Book of Boba Fett. He learned from the success of the MCU by ensuring a connective red thread throughout all the properties and gave creative control back to the writers and directors of all of those properties. And... oh wait, hold on 1 second. What do you mean that wasn't Bob Iger? That was... oh wait, that was Kathleen Kennedy? Wow, really? But wait, she's not a man. That witch that ruined Star Wars by hiring Ruin Johnson to make the worst Star Wars movie? Nah, who cares? Kathleen Kennedy was producer, so it was her fault, and she ruined Star Wars, and she made a movie I didn't like because she's a woman. Okay, let's cool it for a second, alright? There's arguments on both sides about what was disappointing about the sequel trilogy, who's to blame, etc. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Kathleen Kennedy is a name that nobody can ignore when talking about Disney Star Wars, and her name is usually mentioned along other words, including and a couple other gendered explicits. Maybe it's because she's a woman, or maybe it's because people who hate on her and the sequel trilogy don't really know what they're talking about, because movies are a business, and business is hard, and show business is even harder, and trying to understand it is a lot harder than just blaming somebody. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's because she's a woman in charge of property that has been part of male-dominated interculture since the 70s. Maybe it's both. I don't know. Please don't kill me. I can feel the comments turning toxic already. Is the sequel trilogy good? That depends on who you ask, because each film has artistic merit, and each film also has glaring pitfalls, and each fan has their own relationship with the franchise. But when you listen to what a lot of fans and critics have to say about it, it seems the consensus is that, as far as Star Wars movies go, the sequel trilogy it's not the most beloved. Sure, it pulled in well over 4 Bs, making it a financial success. At times, it explored what the potential of Star Wars could be and posed some really interesting philosophical questions. And for the silent majority of moviegoers and kids who maybe go to the movies 2 or 3 times a year, I mean, yeah, it's got plenty of whiz-bang lightsaber force action with bad guys and lasers and stuff, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I have my opinions on the sequel trilogy, and you have yours. I'm here to instead ask the question, is Disney good for Star Wars? And why does it matter? There's a lot to unpack when it comes to Disney Star Wars, and front and center of that conversation is the sequel trilogy. And right alongside of it is Kathleen Kennedy. And while there's plenty of understandable and legitimate reasons to dislike the former, the dislike placed upon the latter tends to come from a place of ignorance. Some of it genuinely sexist, some of it just uninformed. I promise this is not another Kathleen Kennedy Star Wars politics video. This is a video about why Disney is important for the future of Star Wars. But to talk about that, first we have to unpack a lot of the dialogue that's been happening in the fandom, and then we can kind of get to the conversation around the future of all of this. The real story here is that Disney acquired Star Wars for $4 billion. As soon as all of this new staff came on to continue the largest science fiction franchise in our galaxy, conflict immediately arose. George Lucas made Kathleen Kennedy a key man in the acquisition deal because he wanted her to do for his franchise what she had done for his friend Steven Spielberg. George Lucas knew that Star Wars was and would continue to be a pop culture force, and Kennedy had a history of handling big name, big budget franchises and films, including Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, E.T., AI, Hook, Back to the Future, The Goonies, The Sixth Sense, The Twilight Zone, many of which had been produced alongside George's friend and longtime directorial rival, the aforementioned Steven with a V, Spielberg. What made her such a fantastic producer wasn't that she was coincidentally tied to movies that happened to just blow up. Kennedy, in fact, has a personal love of film and filmmakers, and throughout her career has gone to bat for directors who want to do interesting things. She's protected scripts, fought for funding, and helped preserve the artistic integrity of films that would go on to also be box office boons and blockbusters, which is not an easy feat. In fact, the only directors out here able to pull that shit today are Denis Villeneuve and Christopher Nolan, who are able to make artfully crafted narratives that haul in summer movie ticket sales. Kevin Feige is another producer turned studio president who actually repeated Kennedy's formula of bringing genius new talent to blockbuster film productions with Marvel Studios. And Bob Iger knew the value that brought to the House of Mouse. He had his eyes on the future of Disney, which he knew would be streaming. And he knew that to compete with all of the other streaming services like Netflix and Warner Bros. HBO, he needed the executive producers at the helms of the world's biggest media franchises, who would continue to find new ways to grow the IPs and tell new stories that wouldn't just bring in a ton of movie ticket sales every 3 years, but instead stock the Disney streaming service with original content rooted in familiar titles that would bring in $12 a month instead of maybe $40 a year from fans, which is a 360% increase in revenue from the average moviegoer, give or take a few shared account passwords. So yeah, from an artistic and cultural and business perspective, Kennedy brings the goods like few others can. But to do all this costs money, and shareholders don't all care about long-term value. Many shareholders in Disney have been holding stock in the company since the 80s, and they want to retire in the next couple of years. And in order to get the old white men to say yes to $4 billion acquisition for more IP, he needed to show returns fast. Iger made a career for himself by buying up studios and flipping them into moneymakers, and Star Wars was no exception to this. He extended his contract with Disney to remain CEO of the company until the acquisitions that he spent billions on turned a profit, most notably the acquisition of Fox, but Lucasfilm as well. Because from a shareholder perspective, you don't get to rack up a giant tab and then make an Irish exit from the bar. If you're going to ask your board of directors to approve billion-dollar purchases, you need to stick around until those investments start printing money. Iger wanted to retire with his personal interest in Disney fully vested after the decades of work that he'd put into the company, and shareholders wanted to make sure that Bob Iger was on the same page as them and also had skin in the game when it came to making good on the investments that he made as head of Disney. And all of that essentially meant that Disney had to pump out some new content, including a new Star Wars trilogy. Then Iger could retire a billionaire and potentially focus on his 2020 presidential bid. You know, the one that he talks about in literally every interview.
Yeah, it had to work bigly.
It did.
And I say bigly
yeah.
just to bring up another presidential candidate, but yeah.
Not to mention a presidential candidate, but why not?
You can probably see where I'm going with all this. From Kennedy's perspective, they had the opportunity to tell new stories that would define Star Wars for generations, thanks to the Disney acquisition. There's so much rich territory to explore and so many characters that they could follow. But telling these stories right takes time and money, and those at the top needed to see some revenue relatively quickly as far as production schedules go. Marvel Studios had the luxury of time on their hands. They were able to build out the stories they wanted to tell using the formula of young artistic directors interested in telling character-driven stories that fleshed out a larger universe. Lucasfilm and its new president, Kathleen Kennedy, had to repeat that same success in a pressure cooker, and do it in 3 movies. So a loose outline of the next trilogy was drawn up, approved, and directors were picked. Abrams would be the first to handle the IP given his experience with making $100 million blockbusters in short time frames, which would give the newly minted directors Rian Johnson and Colin Trevorrow, who each had their own careers making artistic, character-focused stories, time to flesh out the final 2 installments of the trilogy and kickstart a new era for Star Wars. All 3 directors ended up agreeing on the new direction of Star Wars and went on to recreate the success of Marvel, and everybody was happy and Star Wars is saved, and I really wish that that was where the story went, but we all know that's not how this happened. You see, what made Marvel successful was the fact that each director was given a single character to create. There's an overarching story, but each film focused on a different hero that would feed into the final endgame. Star Wars is not that. It has never been that. It's one story with multiple characters told in a trilogy format. Now, what I'm about to say should be taken with the world's biggest grain of salt and will be said without a degree of nuance, but with time and shareholder pressure working against the creators, each director was given a 2-hour runtime to tell a holistic story that built off of the story that the previous director had penned. And despite a common idea or thread or direction, each director had to change their plans every production. Abrams did rewrites and reshoots on the set of Force Awakens. A lot of those were penned by Bob Iger himself. He even admitted to this in his interview with Abrams on Variety magazine.
When we worked on the movie, your involvement was, it was a terrific collaboration. It was incredible fun. Your collaborative style with notes and ideas and iterations, and obviously there were so many iterations of the movie.
It's very nice of you.
No, it's true, and we're on camera.
And when that happened, it meant that Johnson had to do the same and bring back the story that he wanted to tell from those changes, but the direction of the films then started to feel disconnected because each director had not only spent screen time course correcting the previous iteration, but also had to move the plot forward according to their own vision. This compounding effect of story changes and lack of unity snowballed until Colin Trevorrow was stuck holding the bag, having to answer questions set up in episode 7, respond to criticisms about episode 8, and neatly package it all up into a finale that satisfied fans and justified a new trilogy in the first place. That is a lot of pressure to put on one director. And despite Kennedy's actually real attempts to preserve the artistic integrity of the director's visions, the buck had to stop at the top of the Disney food chain, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that the top of Disney just wanted another billion-dollar chapter to close out the final trilogy. The finale, originally titled Duel of the Fates, would see the end of the Skywalker legacy with an unceremonious fall to the Skywalker bloodline through Kylo Ren, whose deeds made him irredeemable. After a rather dark film full of genocide, torture, some gore, and ultimately Rey becoming the first live-action Grey Jedi, the trilogy would end by passing the torch to a new generation of heroes who could potentially lead their own Star Wars stories in future Disney Plus shows and maybe reunite down the road for the next trilogy. This story was always meant to close out the central theme of Star Wars, that there is good and bad within everyone, and it's up to us to define for ourselves which version of us we choose to become. It would do away with the light-dark dichotomy of the Force and instead give future Star Wars stories the opportunity to follow more morally complex characters with new rules and explore new moral philosophies. This execution of Episode 9, while in line with the vision of where Star Wars needed to go, was scaled back in the name of, quote, creative differences. And that's a nice catch-all term that basically means that it was too dark for a Disney movie. And there was fear that it would be too divisive among fans. Again, for brevity's sake and without regarding any of the nuances that go into the massive productions and storytelling behind the main series, I will just say that the production value coupled with the divisiveness of The Last Jedi may have been the reason why risk-averse leadership told Kennedy throw out all the scary parts of Trevorrow's script and bring in someone else who could just get the thing wrapped up with an ending that wouldn't alienate the family-friendly audience that they were trying to attract to the Disney Plus streaming service, where the future of Star Wars was going to live. What happened next is basically what we got, The Rise of Skywalker, a lukewarm finale to a 40-year-old saga that's nobody's favorite Star Wars movie, but nobody's most hated either. The real goal of Rise of Skywalker was just to give the fans what they wanted, for better or for worse, in order to appeal to the largest number of people possible to ensure that every fan would come back for all the future installments of Star Wars on Disney+, where Star Wars creators would get the opportunity that Marvel creators had, to tell one-off, character-driven stories in a connected universe, and to tell those stories over a longer amount of time. And here's where I think Disney Star Wars matters. Potentially in a way that makes Star Wars more important now than it has ever been in previous media. The challenges faced by the main Star Wars cinematic saga are due a lot to the fact that they're locked into a formula of trilogies. And the world of Star Wars has become too large, and there's too many stakeholders to make a total 6 hours of runtime satisfy every fan, studio exec, and director who touches it. We all look at the most recent trilogy as a cautionary tale of corporate interest overpowering art and story, and pin the blame on the failings of an allegedly inexperienced woman who doesn't look like a Star Wars nerd and is out of touch with fans. But that's kind of an unfair accusation to level at the woman who helped define the modern standard of franchise filmmaking. In hindsight, what we see from the president of Lucasfilm is actually a quality that I think most people don't give her credit for: humility. And by humility, I don't mean passivity. I mean the ability to pick one's battles and know what's worth fighting for and what isn't. Throughout her career, she's been able to spin directors' artistic visions into summer hits and blockbusters, supporting and nurturing talent more so than controlling it. People seem to think that she's in over her head dealing with the creative side of things, but her track record proves that that can't be the case. If anything, the hardest thing she had to deal with would have been dealing with the politics of such a diversified company who needs to make good on shareholder demands and trying to do what she has always done, which is insulate the creators in order to preserve the future of the franchise that she's working on. If faced with the decision of fighting a lost battle against the old guard to defend the plot of one movie, or waiting out the storm to build an entire catalog of content that would preserve the mythology of Star Wars in the long term, I think it's fair to say that Kennedy took the right path by bringing back J.J. Abrams to close out the old formula of Star Wars trilogies and put her energy and focus on building its future the right way, on streaming. It would be easier for all of us to be able to point the finger at one person here and just say, "She ruined my Star Wars." But if anything, it's just the compounding effects of over-the-top expectations from shareholders and fans who both wanted different things out of Star Wars. And you can't blame Kathleen Kennedy or Bob Iger or J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson or Rose Tico for that, because that's just showbiz. Art needs to make money. And for a company like Disney, it needs to make a boatload of money. So with the trilogy of trilogies out of the way, the financial resources of Disney, the talent-first formula that Kennedy helped pioneer, and the massive media distribution platform that is Disney Plus, Star Wars may now finally be in a better place than ever to tell the intricate and complex stories of this giant universe season after season. It has room to truly serialize what was inspired by television serials and return to the roots of what made Star Wars special for so many people without the need to please everyone with one single story. Fans can connect with stories that matter to them and watch them culminate over time into these monumental feature films that give every fan a reason to watch it. And the future of Star Wars won't be defined by legacy fans, casuals, kids, or diehards. It won't live and die by fan backlash. It will instead continue on in various formats across different media with different characters, all with stories that are focused and intersect but don't overpower each other, kind of like Marvel. And that's why Disney matters for Star Wars, because that galaxy far, far away doesn't belong to one emperor anymore, and the people within it don't need to fit into the archetypal hero's journey or fit into the rhyming trilogy format that made Star Wars successful but also cut off its oxygen. Instead, that galaxy can become more detailed, more full of life, and more deeply explored, and more meaningful to more people than it has ever been before.
Well, I was trying to say that to you, and I was also trying to telegraph to you, I don't know that I was necessarily particularly subtle about it, that because of the size of the acquisition and what this first film represented in terms of importance and value creation, that you can expect that it's not going to be treated like any old film by Disney.
All right. Thank you for listening to my first episode of what I'm calling Media Matters. It's pretty late. It's like midnight where I'm at. I'm a dad, so, I'm going to try to pump out new episodes. I've got a couple scripts in mind. I want to do one on the Beatles and what makes them matter. I want to do one on video games, specifically Journey. I played that one recently. I thought that was pretty cool, and there's a lot to talk about there. Silicon Valley, one of my favorite shows. I want to do an episode on that and talk about why Silicon Valley matters. But anyway, if you like this is my first attempt at creating a video essay, and I hate listening to my own voice. I've been doing it for hours, but I'll work on my stage presence a little bit. Anyway, like this, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. If you have any thoughts or ideas around media, it doesn't have to be movies. It could be video games. It could be music. It could be bands, whatever. Leave it in the comments, and I'll put it on there on my list, and I'll do my best to research it and have thoughts on it. So like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.